Welcome! This video contains an introduction, an interview so you can gain deeper understanding of the subject from spirit level, and a group frequency calibration so you can start to clear the frequency distortion patterns around this topic. Enjoy!
Hi everyone, this is Karen Cheong, and I'm here with my co-host Dennis Kelly. The fear of loss is a fundamental human experience. There are so many forms of loss, and we'll often go to great lengths to avoid experiencing it. How much would our experience change if we didn't fear loss? Today we're going to discuss how to shift our perspective so we're not so afraid of loss, how that shift can impact the choices we make, and the opportunities we have. After the discussion, we're going to wrap it up with a group frequency calibration to help to begin to remove the distortion patterns around this topic. So let's jump right in. Dennis?
You know, Karen, I'm curious what your take on this would be. In doing this work, what I've noticed is, as I kind of look back, is that a lot of my life was directed by fear. And as I look at it, I came to the realization that a lot of that fear was that the possibility that if I did something wrong, I'm going to lose something. And what is your take on that?
Yeah, so fear, you're not alone. The fear of loss is a huge driver in human behavior. It's really fundamental in terms of it as a distortion pattern that runs through humans. And the reason a lot of us behave the way we do towards others or towards ourselves is because we're afraid of losing something. So I'm just going to broaden what I mean by loss. So loss can be anything, really. It can be the fear of losing a person. Right? That's why a lot of us will stay in relationship for longer than we want to, because we're afraid of losing the security of having a relationship, of having that person in our lives, or whatever it is. We're afraid of that. It could be fear of loss of that person from death or sickness or whatever. So we're afraid of death, that kind of loss for the people we care about the most. In ourselves as well, that fear of death, because it's a loss of life and what we think, we're very afraid of that. Obviously, it's like one of the biggest losses. Then there's the fear of loss of resources, of time. So all of these things very much influence how it is that we perceive the world and experience the world, and from that, how we behave. And it is surprising how much we do not want to experience fear of loss. We're very, very, very averse to it. We'll do a lot to avoid it. So I would say that is a huge driver for a lot of people. And when we're acting from that standpoint, we're really associating from the little s self that we've talked about many times in past videos, past episodes, where we're seeing things from the ego mind. Because from that perspective, there's an inherent or implicit separation from the divine. Okay? There's scarcity. There's not enough. So as a result, there is something to lose. And if we lose, then it's going to be a bad thing. Okay, we don't sometimes even know what we're afraid of. It's just like we're afraid of losing, even if we're not even sure exactly what that means. So with this running, we reinforce to ourselves that there is scarcity in our reality, and that we're inherently separate from the all that is.
You know, and as I looked at that myself from a personal standpoint, I could see that lineage also had quite a bit of impact on this, and I can see, where it came from, parents, grandparents, and the situations they went through, as far as loss of jobs or loss of income or loss of a home or loss of a child, or so I can see where this is all very natural. As far as how it's kind of reflected in my personal life.
Yeah, totally. And it's okay. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So we have talked about this in past episodes, but in case people are new and they don't really understand this, I'm just going to talk about settings. Okay. So whether you're aware of it or not, you are kind of like a program running. Okay, you're like you're a hologram. So I'm just going to go a little bit out here in left field. So maybe go with me a little bit. So around you, if you've listened to any of my GFCs or group frequency calibrations, you'll recognize that I always say, be aware of the sphere around you. Okay, which is at arm's length. That's your spirit body. So that sphere, which is all around you, okay, projects inwards into the center of it the rendering that is you, your physical body, and then from there, your physical reality. So your brain is the mechanism with which you you take that spirit projection from spirit body, right, just coming in spherically, and it renders your physical reality. Okay, so we also, because we're a rendering, we have certain settings, right? Just like a computer program, right? Just like to render any kind of image or file or whatever it is, there's certain settings, right? Certain basic logic or rule sets that things are based on in order to bring them into form. It's the same thing. It's similar anyway, in terms of the physical embodiment of the rendering from spirit level. So we have these things that I call global settings, okay, which are fundamental to how we as humans render or what our experience is. So when I talk about global settings from spirit level, one of the base global settings, the first one that's set, is that of human. Now I realize that sounds kind of funny to some people. It's like, of course we're human. Not all of us. It sounds funny, but you have to distinguish yourself. That setting distinguishes you as having a certain consciousness, a certain set of rules. Okay, that's not all that is, right? That's the first setting is human. From there, you have the global settings of male, female, and then there are a whole bunch of them that fall under that. But those are the two main ones, and the first ones that are set, meaning they're the most base foundational settings upon which other settings are put on top of, if that makes sense, or derive. Let's just say that's a better way of saying it. So anyway, at the very global setting of human, and this can also be reflected deep in the DNA. So meaning that global setting, human, any distortion pattern at this global setting will often start to create distortion at the DNA level. Okay, so what I mean by this is that deep things like spiritual debt, which is something we talked about in a different episode. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, please go back and watch Finally Free, Releasing the Stranglehold of Spiritual Debt, and we'll talk all about that. That is something that is a distortion pattern set at the global setting. Fear of loss is another distortion pattern set at the global setting of human. It's like when you come in as a human, that's kind of like running in the field. You're going to almost have that in you, whatever culture you're from, whatever class you're in, whatever it is. If you're human, you're going to have this distortion pattern. Doesn't matter where you're born on the earth, you're going to have it. So our lineages, because we have these distortion pattern runnings and it's at the global setting of human, right? The foundational setting, it then distorts further, right? As the lineage has this experience, it distorts around it. We have things like culture and religion, which further distort this pattern, right? Like you don't, so a lot of religious patterns are you don't want to lose out on your connection to the divine. And we're the intermediaries for that. That's very running through a lot of religions, right? So the fear of loss is something that's really fundamental and foundational. That is why we're talking about it right now. As we move into this newer consciousness that you and I have been talking about, we start to move from identification of the little s self, which has this distortion pattern of fear of loss very prevalent running through us, to big S self, okay, which is from identifying from spirit. So again, little s self, identification from ego mind, big S self from identification more with spirit. When you have more of an identification of spirit, how you perceive scarcity changes. Really, truly. Because imagine, if you're aware as big S self of yourself from spirit level, you have an awareness of yourself as infinite, indestructible consciousness. Therefore, you are aware that you're implicit, integral, intrinsic to the all that is. There is no scarcity. It doesn't exist. It's infinite. It's infinite. So there can be no loss. There can only be a change of form. Okay. So I realize this might be a bit of a stretch for you because you're like, well, then Karen, then what happens when I'm losing somebody I love who dies? So I realize this may fly in the face of people who have certain things that they grew up with. However, I know that from a human standpoint, the little s self, it's actually very sad. Okay, there's a lot of loss, there's grief. But from the big S self, you realize that person has just changed form. They've let go of a physical embodiment, and they now exist in a disembodied state. If they died awake, they are from a much higher, more empowered state. So I'll just bring that back to like my dad. So when he passed away, my father and I were very close. And if you want to learn more about how he took me through the death process and sort of my version of a near-death experience, please watch the episode entitled, Are You Afraid of Death? That's extremely helpful. Although that was a very intense moment in my life because somebody that I was very close to is my father, right, that I loved very much, died. So from a human perspective, I was experiencing that loss, that grief. I also was experiencing it from the big S self, where he was able to take me through the death process, show me what the death process looked like so that I wouldn't be afraid of it and that I would be able to die awake myself, right? Like he's showing me, like, this is what it looks like. Don't be afraid. Okay. So he just changed form. Now, it's very sad from a human perspective because, of course, I love my father and that physical embodiment, that humanness of him will not reappear again. However, I also, because I have identification with the big S self, I'm very aware of my connection to him as a being that is not my physical father, right? Do I miss my physical father? Absolutely, of course, a lot. And I also, not all the time, occasionally am very aware of him being around me. Right? He's from a different, like he's not his human self. He's a different form. But do you see what I'm saying? There's no loss. He's just changed form. So when you are connected to the infiniteness of the large S self, you recognize that. And although you might have a human experience of that, the fear of loss really shifts because you have a greater perspective.
You know, I think one of the things that I noticed when I kind of examined that fear of loss is that there seemed to be a real direct relationship to attachment. So the greater the fear of losing something, the stronger the attachment. And so it's almost like those two work together.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's brilliant. Yeah, because it's true, right? The more you're attached to something, the less surrendered you are, the less neutral you are, the more attached you are to the outcome. It's really difficult to, the more fear of loss you have, for sure. So it's, you're right. Those two things are very, very intertwined. It's a really good indicator. So where you have fear of loss is likely where you have attachment. So fear of loss can be really beneficial in terms of looking at, wait a minute, what am I really, what do I feel like I can't do without? Like if I lose this, like I'm going to be in jeopardy, I'm going to feel bad, I'm going to not be able to recover, I'm going to be overwhelmed by grief, whatever it is. That is a good indication of where you're attached and where more work needs to be done to look at the underlying patterns that are causing that attachment so you can release them and enter more of a state of neutrality around that. And I think also this is really key, not only, I mean, it's key in every part of our lives, but especially in intimate relationships, right? We're so afraid of losing the partner, the one that we are intimate with, that will put up, a lot of people will put up with a lot of abuse or control or whatever it is, right? Because they don't want to, they're afraid of the loss of that relationship. But as you start to, because we're so attached to having that partner for whatever reason, there may be a lot of cultural or religious things which say like you failed if you aren't in partnership. You may feel like, you know what I mean? Like all these different types of things that underpin that fear of loss. So when you start to release those things, those distortion patterns, then you can become free and then start to assess with more clarity, okay, what's happening in this intimate partnership? Is it really serving the greatest and highest good for us both to be in it? Yeah. So, yeah, you can see it rife in everything.
And I think that, there's a simple little exercise that we can do to kind of just check ourselves as far as that fear of loss and that relationship to attachment is, if you just take a piece of paper and just kind of list 20 very prominent things in your life.
Yeah.
And then just slowly just kind of walk down that list and just watch and listen and, be aware of your body as you think, what if I lost this house? Kind of what kind of impact? What if I lost this relationship? What if I lost this car? What if I lost this cat or this dog? And it's surprising because, at face value, you'd say, well, I'm good. I'm pretty good. But when you actually start to kind of walk through your life profile, you can see, well, maybe I've got a little work to do,
Right. Yeah. And I think for some people, it's going to be even hard for them to write all those things on that list because there's so much fear of losing on that list. They can't even write all that stuff down. So that would be a good tell for you, an indicator that there is distortion pattern to release. And again, this is not about having like a false sense of like, I'm all good with everything. It's really about gauging, as you say, your bodily response. Your body is interesting. It will, like when you have a tightening, for example, in your body, it's very clear. Like your mind can tell yourself different stories about different things or excuse things, or, you know what I mean? It's kind of slippery, but your body's response is like a very clear, often indicator of what really is happening. So if you feel tightening or like sweating or you know what I mean? Like a holding of the breath, you'll notice that your body doesn't like when you go down that list, for example. So it's easy, really not easy. It's a helpful tool to use that as a response, to gauge response to fear of loss and attachment and that type of thing. So I think it's a great exercise. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. Is there anything else before we wrap up, Karen, as far as the fear of loss and from your perspective?
Yeah. So what I would say is it's very easy to talk about this and it's not easy to overcome with your mind. Okay. It's like, I decide that I don't want to feel fear of loss. It's not that easy. It's not about mindset. It's not about forcing from an emotional standpoint, like pushing away what it is that you feel lost from, like suppressing it. That doesn't really work either because suppressing our emotion doesn't help us. It just creates more distortion. So although this is a short talking segment, the bigger work is going to be done in the GFC. We'll probably do a more extensive series on this, possibly as a deep dive or a GFC later. We did cover it in Coherence Mastery, the series. It was an entire class on this. But likely there will be something else given as more support for this. But the GFC at the end is where the real work begins. So you can start to release this because you'll notice that when you start to release fear of loss, your choices or what you perceive to be your opportunities or possibilities will shift. Because if you're not afraid of losing something, what you believe to be possible for you or the possibilities even opened to you and the opportunities are very different than when you're afraid of losing something. So you'll notice that things that you hadn't noticed before or that you negated or that you naysayed on will somehow all of a sudden seem more possible to you, because you've released this foundational distortion pattern, which then allows you to live a much fuller, more highly expressed or authentic to your true nature experience of life, which is really amazing because we're starting to live more fully into our human potential, which is really awesome. And one of the key things is to remove this foundational distortion pattern, which we can do in the GFC.
And what I thought about is when you said that and kind of taking a look at where we're at, is that, we talked about that attachment and, so I've got the fear of loss and so I've really attached. Well, when we're operating, in a mode where we're kind of paralyzed with this fear, there's really not much room for anything to come in.
Yes.
And so that's,
yes.
I think what you're saying is, we open and we start to overcome that fear of loss, then all of a sudden, these miracles and this magic begins to happen.
Yeah. And a lot more awareness too. So a lot of more awareness of like, oh, I put up with this kind of controlling, kind of crappy behavior because I'm afraid of losing this person. Or wait, I'm actually kind of controlling of these people or this situation or this work or this whatever, because I'm afraid of losing something. That's weird. Why do I care so much about that? You see? And then as you start to do more and more of the release on the fear of loss, that starts to shift because you realize, well, geez, do I need those things? And that's when the empowerment comes in, right? Because you're like, well, maybe I don't. So see, it seems like a small thing to listen to the GFCs and do the work. But when they're foundational distortion patterns, I mean, not just when they're not, any distortion pattern, when we start to remove them, awareness shifts, what we think shifts, our perceptions shift, opportunities open up, and that's when you start to say, as you do more and more of it, that's when the magic, the synchronicities, all that stuff starts to happen in this really amazing way. So yeah, I agree.
Wow. Well, like you mentioned earlier, this is certainly a very human, part of who we are and what we are. So thank you very much for helping us with this, Karen.
Thank you.
Karen, could you help me? I hear so often when I look at your video or your website, GFC. Exactly what is that?
A GFC is a group frequency calibration, which looks a lot like a guided meditation on a particular topic. And what I'm doing is I'm helping you to remove the distortion patterns of that particular topic. And because you're coming together as a mastermind in a group to connect to pure source even more and to clear the distortion patterns of this particular topic, what happens is a tremendous amount of momentum starts to happen because of the energetic of the entire group. And each individual is able to move faster and ascend higher than they could have on their own. Welcome everyone to the group frequency calibration for losing the fear of loss. So taking a deep breath and noticing your body. And as you notice your body, please become aware of the pads of your toes. Noticing what they're touching, if they're cool or warm. Good. Yes, and now please notice the palms of your hands. Good. And now becoming aware of your breath. Without changing it at first, just noticing your breath. And after you've taken a couple of breaths, just noticing it without changing it, allowing yourself to now lengthen your breath. Allowing it to become much more full. Filling not only your front body, like your chest, but also your back body. And notice if you can allow the breath to drop deep into your belly. Good. And now please become aware of your surroundings. At first noticing the sound, both on your end and on my end, other than the sound of my voice. The birds in the background, traffic in the distance. perhaps the sound of voices or music far away. And noticing the soundscape. And if you can, notice which direction the sound is coming from. And when you're ready, noticing the quality of the air. So feeling its movement, noticing its temperature, whether it is humid or dry. Good. And now please triangulate. For those of you who are new, triangulating simply means becoming aware of 3 inanimate objects in the space around you. What those objects are is not important. You're going to notice object A. Let's imagine that that is the coffee table. And you're going to notice the distance between the coffee table and you. And then you're going to feel the distance between the coffee table and you. And then you're going to do the same thing with objects B and then object C. And you'll notice that as you do this, your sense of where you are in space becomes more clear or somehow more present for you. Good. And now please become aware of your xiphoid process, which is right at the base of your sternum. Your sternum is that big, thick bone in the center of your chest where your ribs meet in front of your body. Right at the base of your sternum is your xiphoid process. Becoming aware of your xiphoid process. It's a little bit tender when you press on it, so you'll know it's that. With your attention now on your xiphoid process, you're going to please take a nice deep breath in, holding your breath for a count of 5. And whenever you're ready, releasing all the air out of your lungs and holding your breath out for a count of 4. Waiting for the mastermind to coalesce and to become coherent. And whilst we wait for that, I'm just going to mention, for those of you who are new, that I'm working on you at the group and the subgroup level. And that I'll often be working in silence. Okay? Because especially when I'm working at the very high frequency levels, it doesn't benefit you if I make physical noise. It just drops the resonance. And sometimes I will make physical noise. You'll hear me hum or exhale sharply or sometimes even yawn. And that's just how I remove some of the lower level, stickier, sometimes more dense frequencies. So just know that I might be making noise. If I say something that you really resonate with, it's likely yours. If I say something that you really resist, it's likely yours too. So I invite you to remain open and to examine further. Good. So now that the mastermind has coalesced, we're going to ask ourselves the following question. How can I become even more aware of my connection only to pure source. And that question again is, how can I become even more aware of my connection only to pure source? And as you ask yourself that question, please imagine, sense, feel, or become aware of the space at the very center of your body. And as you become aware of what is a surprisingly vast space, noticing a brilliance that you either see or feel at its very center. And as you keep your attention on this brilliance, it intensifies and starts to expand outwards through all of your cells, out through your organs, through your bones, radiating out through your muscles and your flesh, and out through the pores of your skin into the space between your physical body and your spirit body, which is a sphere at arm's length all around you. Good. Please become aware of the brilliance within the sphere. Yes. And now please become aware of the infinite space all around the sphere. And as you become aware of this infinite space, I'm working on you at spirit level to increase your frequency resonance, irrespective of where it began. The higher your frequency resonance, the more beneficial the session, because it will be coming from the highest resonating order. Also will speed your integration. Good. Yes. Very nice. Bring your attention now, please, to your heart space in the center of your chest and your nipple line. The first distortion pattern that we're going to release is attachment to either people or what you think you have. Okay, the known. Good. Yeah. Continuing to keep your attention in your heart space, in addition to that xiphoid process at the base of the sternum. Keeping your attention on those two spots. So this is the resistance to letting go. Okay, even to things that you might not even want anymore. But this is a very strong resistance to letting go. So let's release this. Yeah. Good. Keeping your attention in that xiphoid process alone. Yeah, this is a control pattern. So you think you want what you have, and you think you want what you want. And so there's a lot of control being exercised to keep everything in those two ways, like fixed. So that is a control pattern. Either you do it to the people around you, or you are what other people try to control in an attempt to control what they have or what they want. So let's release this control pattern. It's pretty deep. Good. Yeah. Bring your attention to your heart space. This is the fear of judgment or punishment or something bad if you were to let go of something. So, and there's also like a scarcity frequency here that we're going to address. Like if you let something go and something else won't come in, that's the only thing you've got. Bringing your attention to your xiphoid process, about 3 inches or 7 centimeters directly beneath it towards your belly button. Clearing out and resetting your pain body because it has a memory. And if we don't take a couple of seconds to reset your pain body, then those memories make it harder to integrate the memory of you with all the distortion pattern. So once we clear this out, we can reset the cleared out plain body into the new version of yourself so you can integrate faster. There we go. Good. This brings us to the end of this session. I look forward to working with you on the next GFC. These GFCs help people release distortion patterns. It's my sincere hope that you benefit profoundly from this series, which is why I spend so much of my personal resources creating these as my gift to the world. If a GFC topic resonates with you, often more work that can be provided in this one GFC is needed to really clear or loosen deeply held distortion patterns in areas that are sticky. Because these patterns are like layers of an onion, usually there are multiple layers to individual topics. Depending on how much of a challenge this topic is for you, it may make sense for you to go deeper than what this session allows. If you feel this is the case for you, please visit sphericalluminosity.com for more targeted support.